I want to welcome you all to the 21st session of the Mapping Global Populism panel series organized by the European Center for Populism Studies. I am Stella Schade. I'm an intern with ECPS since March and currently a master's student in conflict studies and comparative politics at the London School of Economics and Political Science. I'm very excited to present this panel today and hear about the interesting topics presented by our speakers. So ECPS has curated this panel series aimed at dissecting the diverse manifestations of rising populism and authoritarian tendencies across the world. Following the successful conclusion of our 8-session Mapping European Populism panels, we have embarked on a journey to explore these tendencies beyond the confines of Europe by expanding our panel series to encompass a global perspective aptly titled Mapping Global Populism. Our objective is to construct a comprehensive understanding of populism and authoritarianism worldwide, featuring monthly sessions. Today, we will have our 21st session of the Mapping Global Populism panel series. The session will examine ethnic and sectarian politics and populism in Iraq, Syria, and Kurdish regions. As a testament to our commitment to knowledge dissemination, we are going to write a panel report and share the video recording of this panel on our website and YouTube channel. These resources serve as invaluable references for scholars, policymakers, and a wider audience concerned about the contemporary challenges to global democracy posed by populist and authoritarian politics. In the ongoing journey of our panel series, we extend our gratitude to all the scholars and experts who contribute their extensive insights. With this, I introduce our esteemed moderator and distinguished panelists for today's discussion. So today's panel is going to be moderated by Dr. Ibrahim al-Marashi, who is Associate Professor of Middle East History at California State University, San Marcos, and an advisory board member of the International Security and Conflict Resolution Program at San Diego State University, as well as an adjunct lecturer of its School of Public Health. He is also a visiting lecturer with the University of San Diego's Department of Political Science and International Relations. Dr. al-Marashi received his doctorate from the University of Oxford. He is the co-author of Iraq's Armed Forces and Analytical History, 2008, The Modern History of Iraq, 2016, and A Concise History of the Middle East, 2024. So now on to our panelists. Dr. Reda Mahajar will be our first speaker today to discuss the Syrian Sunni Jihadi chicken home to Roost, Assad's fatal gamble in Iraq. Dr. Mahajar is a research fellow at the Conflict Analysis Research Center at the University of Kent. His current postdoctoral research focuses on how the Hajj rituals reproduce the Sunni and Shia labels as categories of power in Western Europe. Dr. Mahajar earned his PhD in International Relations from the University of Kent. His PhD dissertation titled Shialism, the Historical Persistence of the Sunni-Shia Binary, examines the historical persistence of the Sunni-Shia labels as constructs of power in the Arab and Muslim worlds, as well as in the proverbial West. Dr. Maharaj's research interests include exploring the ontological, temporal, and epistemological assumptions that underpin conceptualizations of identities as categories of power in the fields of international relations, migration, Middle Eastern studies, and nationalism studies. Mr. Hashim Hayder Khashan Al-Rekabi will be our second speaker, presenting on the topic Waves of Populism in Iraq. Mr. Al-Rekabi is a lecturer at Baghdad University, where he teaches courses in behavioral statistics and introduction to political science. He also mentors senior students in drafting their capstone research projects. Additionally, he's the founder of the Platform Center for Sustainable Development, which aims to establish a policy-oriented youth network to drive positive change through policy work. Al-Rekabi holds a master's degree in comparative politics from Western Illinois University. The third presentation of today's panel will be delivered by Dr. Haian Dukhan on the topic Memory, Fear, and Sectarianism in Syria. Dr. Dukhan is a lecturer in politics and international relations at Teeside University and a fellow at the Center for Syrian Studies, University of St. Andrews. He is the author of State and Tribes in Syria, Informal Alliances and Conflict Patterns, and co-editor of Spoils of War in the Arab East, Reconditioning Society and Polity in Conflict. His research focuses on the international relations of the Middle East, with a particular emphasis on the role of non-state actors in armed conflicts. His work has appeared in major international journals. He has also authored multiple policy reports for USAID, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, the Middle East Institute, and others on issues related to sectarianism, extremism, and forced migration. Due to scheduling conflict, Dr. Dukhan couldn't join us live, so we'll be sharing his pre-recorded presentation as part of today's panel. Unfortunately, our fourth speaker, Dr. Shilan Fuad Hussain, couldn't be with us today, so we will continue with our fifth and final panelist, Ms. Rojin Mukriyan, who will deliver a presentation titled The Evolution and Mishaps of Kurdish Identity Politics Under Multiple Dominations. Ms. Mukriyan is a PhD candidate in the Department of Government and Politics at University College Cork, Ireland. Mukriyan's main research areas are in political theory and Middle Eastern politics, especially Kurdish politics. She has published articles in the Journal of International Political Theory, Philosophy and Social Criticism, and Theoria. Her research has thus far focused on the areas of Kurdish liberty, Kurdish statehood, and Kurdish political friendship. She has published many think tank commentaries and reports on recent political developments in eastern Kurdistan or northwestern Iran. She has also frequently appeared on a variety of Kurdish and Persian language news channels. So, as a reminder, we will have a Q&A session after the completion of the presentations. Our respected participants can write their questions in the chat box or by raising their virtual hand and post their questions in person. Now, I turn it over to Dr. Ibrahim al-Marashi, who will provide an overview of the panel's subject matter and administer the panel.
Thank you, Stella, for that introduction. Good morning to all of you. I'm talking to you from San Diego, California, where the day rises under another populist leader who is administering our country. And with that, I wanted to more or less set a history of this concept and how it applies to the regions and countries we're talking about today. I'm reminded of how difficult it was, or the challenges, or the debates that ensued about translating a new term in Arabic around the 90s after the collapse of the Cold War, and that was globalization. And with that term, Olama was chosen. Of course, I remember as a grad student at Georgetown in Michael Hudson's seminar, when I first heard that term globalization in Arabic, I was trying to wonder, so you have to imagine this is in the mid 90s. What was the term then that would replace a counter reaction to globalism and globalization in the 1990s? Now, when I'm saying a counter term, of course, I'm thinking of an Arabic term. Of course, isms, it's very difficult in translating isms into Arabic or Persian for that matter. So, of course, with globalism, I thought of, and again, this is just a thought experiment in the 1990s. I immediately hearkened back to the Libyan government's idea of not a republic, but a political institute of the masses, a jamahir. And would a jamahirism, see how poorly the translation works in English, and but nevertheless, the notion of the Jamahir, would that constitute a precursor to the notion of populism? Because after all, this is a project on mapping populism, but we're trying to graft this idea onto three particular locales: Iraq, Syria, and the various Kurdish entities. If you want, Upper Mesopotamia, the Al Jazeera region. So, in terms of grafting this idea, of course, what immediately comes to mind is to set up the kind of historical parameters is taking Max Weber's idea of charisma, and which leaders could I think of immediately in the most recent history that basically ruled with some kind of inherent sense of charisma, and how did that affect their more or less populist program? So I more or less, I'll begin with maybe three leaders. Really, when it came to Iraq, the term populism was primarily applied to Muqtada al-Sadr. Now, Muqtada al-Sadr entered the popular imagination in 2003. Prior to that date, he was an unknown commodity. So let's set up, the life and trajectory of Muqtada al-Sadr as a comparison point, and how did this serve as an attempt to graft the notion of populism in terms of Iraq's post 2003 politics. Really, if you want to talk about populist figures, I'm thinking of Muqtada's father and also his cousin in Lebanon at the same time. The Lebanese Sadr that was, I mean, the Sadr that went to Lebanon, and it was the founder of Harakat Amal, the Amal movement that would later disappear during a trip to Libya to the Gaddafi's Jamahir, and almost achieve kind of a semi-divine status because of his disappearance. So, of course, I'm talking about the story of two Sadrs, one that went to Lebanon, and of course, Muqtada Sadr's father, a prominent cleric that even with his abduction and eventual murder by the Iraqi state, was able to, more or less, to everyone's surprise, garner a loyalty that endured until the collapse of the state of Saddam Hussein's. The collapse of Saddam Hussein's state. Muqtada Sadr inherited his father's charisma. And from that point onwards, what was described as a young populist cleric has become a fixture in Iraq's politics, never translating that charisma or popular standing into a standing party. An institute that has transformed its name numerous times, but the common denominator in that was the loyalty to Sadr. You once had a militia known as the Mahdi Army, transformed into the Peace Brigades, a political loyalty that's really around the character of Sadr, that even when you channeled that populist loyalty to the ballot box, people voted for candidates not due to the candidates necessarily political background qualifications, but just due to their affiliation to Sadr. The interesting thing about the Sadr's experience over the last 2 decades is the following. Muqtada Sadr inherited his father's charisma beyond people's underestimation of his capabilities. He's become a fixture in Iraqi politics. But, populists are always known as trying to maybe mobilize the masses in the name of countering the technocrats, the faceless technocrats that usually are in service of the forces of neoliberalism and globalization. The interesting case about the Sadr's experience in Iraq was the opposite, that his campaign promise was, elect me, I will bring us a, a regime of governance by the technocrats. And this is what I found quite interesting in terms of the Sudras experience. So, to get us on time, I'll just conclude with a few other examples to kind of set the parameters. Two figures who, of course, are in the media now, are in the spotlight, two relatively unknown quantities in terms of how they'll govern. Will Ahmed Jolani or Ahmed Shara be that new populist leader for Syria? Now, for those of you who don't know, he does inherit some charisma from previous relatives who were fixtures in Syrian politics. Definitely not jihadist politics, but they were, his family is a political family in Syria. And of course, the legacy of Abdullah Öcalan. Does Öcalan uh, qualify as a populist, particularly in his interpretation of Murray Bookchin, and then his transnational following, and just a very good example of a transnational following. Of course, I'm thinking of an experience I had in Turin. So when you think Turin, you think of the great Fiat factories, the life of Antonio Gramsci, but also kind of this transnational, cross-confessional rally in the name of Öcalan, and just the variety of people there. There were a variety of Italians, of course, Kurds, but does his kind of following of Murray Bookchin translate him to as a populist as well? So these are just some thoughts. I wanted to set up the panel, and for that point, I want to end right here as moderator, just to kind of adhere to a strict regime of time. So it's 20 after the hour, and Reda Mahajar will be speaking. Uh, if you could just keep your eye out, Reda, for a message I will send directly to
Mhm.
you at
Okay.
5 minutes towards the end of your presentation. I'll just give you 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and if we go beyond 35 after, I might intervene with the microphone to kindly ask you to
We
conclude.
wouldn't need that, that's for sure.
Very good, but the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ibrahim. Um, okay. Can you see my PowerPoint slides? Okay, good. Thank you.
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. Very pleased to talk to you all today. Today's topic is about Syrian Sunni jihadis, chickens coming home to roost, and Bashar al-Assad's fatal gamble in Iraq. Let me start with this. Ibrahim mentioned one of these two, Ahmed al-Shara, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Julani. If you would put Abu Muhammad al-Julani, the current president of Syria, a UN designated terrorist, with the former president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, what these two individuals would have in common with each other? Absolutely not. One was supposedly a secular and Alawite dictator. The other one is a Sunni jihadi who basically, and these two individuals would, if they were to sit in one room, they would disagree on virtually everything that has to do with politics. However, despite the magnificent differences, and remember, one of them toppled the other, Ahmed al-Shara, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, toppled the regime of Bashar al-Assad, and now he's the current president of Syria. However, what they have in common with each other is, and what they agreed with each other, they both violently supported, sustained the violence in Iraq to render the country ungovernable after the 2003. One eagerly, that is Bashar al-Assad, facilitated the influx of the Sunni jihadis to Iraq. The other one was merely one of the many Bashar al-Assad helped to, and facilitate. Syria served as a launching pad for many of these Sunni jihadis to cross over to Iraq. How that happened? Actually, their fates, Bashar al-Assad and Abu Muhammad al-Julani, was to a certain extent sealed on a meeting between Bashar al-Assad and Colin Powell in May 2003, after 1 month of the American toppling the regime of Saddam Hussein. Both Abdel Halim Khaddam and Sami Klip. Abdel Halim Khaddam was a former vice president to Syria, who basically went into exile and opposed the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Sami Klip was, until quite recently, a close journalist to the so-called Annex of Resistance. So both of them, they agree at that meeting, Colin Powell warned Bashar al-Assad, either you would change your regional policies or you will share Saddam's fate. Well, what Bashar al-Assad did, his idea was to support the so-called, fuel chaos in Iraq by, supporting, the so-called resistance. He helped smuggling arms, sponsored Sunni jihadis, or who were crossing the border from Syria to Iraq. Assad regime, the irony, of course, is that Assad's regime facilitated the rise of Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, and that, person actually later became more or less like a Frankenstein instead of Bashar al-Assad. So the irony is that Assad's support for the Sunni jihadis facilitated the resurgence and the empowerment of militant Sunni groups across both Syria and Iraq. Both trained, many say his intelligence services trained many of these militants, redirected, who later on redirected their anger onwards into Syria later on. But the flashpoint comes into major events. I mean, after 2003, those who remember these long years of, on daily basis, there would be multiple suicide attacks in Iraq carried out by Sunni jihadis. The vast majority of them were, who have crossed the border from Syria. So in 2007, after one massive suicide attack, or bomb attack that killed over 130 people, the Iraqi government blamed Syria. The spokesman for the Iraqi government, Ali Dabbar, said 50% of terrorism that is happening in Iraq is entering from Syria. After that, in 2009, Iraq, after a massive coordinated suicide attacks in Baghdad, that Iraq formally filed a complaint at the UN Security Council against Bashar al-Assad and his regime, that they were sponsoring, helping these Sunni jihadis come to carry out the attacks in Iraq. Bashar al-Assad never, he was calling that helping the resistance, while he was trying to distance himself that these so-called resistance is killing Iraqi, civilians. But it would come across that in many instances, he would, for example, at one point, he would, in 2007, for example, in Hayat newspaper, he was saying, we agreed to, tackle the issue of the jihadis crossing the border from Syria to Iraq because we care about the Iraqi population. Otherwise, we would continue to support them so that Iraq would serve as a buffer zone for the Americans so that they wouldn't attack Syria and force a regime change in Syria. Now, the irony, of course, is the secular Alawite leader, despised and hated by Sunni fundamentalists, arms the jihadis who see him as heretic, which is, something he never, I think he quite underestimated that. In order to understand the irony of that, we need to look at the Syrian textbook. The Syrian education system under both Hafez al-Assad, the father, and his son, Bashar al-Assad, is Sunni. The school curriculum is, imagined, constituted through the Sunni narrative. There's no tolerance or respect for religious traditions rather than Sunnism. Islam is, by default, means Sunni. Even Bashar al-Assad, in public, he was, pretending to be a Sunni in order, because the public culture in Syria was by and large Sunni. The Assad struggled to be good Sunnis, not to make the Sunnis into, good liberals or good seculars, according to Joshua Landis. It is quite common in Syria to hear Sunnis claim that non-Sunnis, particularly Alawite, are the worshippers of human. Again, This is, a widely held view by the vast majority in Syria. And the Syrian textbook itself, for example, this is the sixth grade, religious education textbook, basically answering the question of Islam fighting atheism and paganism. The choice that the textbook gives is Islam accept two choices for them, for those who are considered atheist or paganist, either to embrace Islam or to be killed. So the very fact that Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, for example, here, in his interview with Al Jazeera, I think this was in 2015, 16, he basically makes the argument that the Sunnis need to renounce their religion and in return and embrace Islam, which really means Sunni in that case, in order for them to be, our brothers and our equals. Another, jihadi leader, his name is Zahran Aloush. He was later killed by the Russian Air Force strike. He made a speech in 2013 that making the argument that we will bring back the Sunni Umayyad Empire. Shia and Alawite, the Majus, must be cleansed from all Syria. According to Joshua Landis, the point that Zahran Aloush was making was right out of the Syrian textbook, pretty much the same that the argument that Abu Muhammad al-Jolani was making. Now, history repeats itself. Those fools who do not learn from history are doomed to live through it again. Many people would say, well, Bashar al-Assad was no exception. Remember, Anwar Sadat, he empowered Sunni Islamists in order to fight the influence of the supporters of Jamal Abdel Nasser later on. The very people he supported, eventually one of them, Muhammad al-Islambuli, assassinated him. The other was the American. After the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, the Americans supported the freedom fighters. Here you have a picture of President Reagan meeting with these freedom fighters, the Mujahideen, in the White House. One of these Mujahideen, the Independent wrote, an article saying, an anti-Soviet warrior putting his army into the road of peace. This is none the less than, Osama ibn Laden. Well, as you might know, the Osama bin Laden was responsible for the 9/11. So Assad, in a sense, ignored its history, armed these Sunni jihadis, and ultimately paid the price, the return of Ahmed al-Jonani. He remains, until up to this very moment, a UN-designated terrorist who was trained in the Iraqi insurgency, returned in Syria to launch the Al-Qaeda's branch in Syria, later splitted so that he would dodge American drones. And by September 2000, actually I put it here 2014, it's 2024, obviously, he toppled the very regime of Bashar al-Assad. Again, the irony here is that, this is one example of how Bashar al-Assad's arrogance and ignorance, together with his dictatorship, of course, the way he cracked down on demonstrators, and even until his demise a few months earlier, he stubbornly refused to meet with Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish prime minister, president, simply because he was too arrogant to meet with her. Ultimately, he paid the price, but he was simply he went into exile. But the core argument I'm trying to make here is that by helping the so-called Iraqi resistance, Bashar al-Assad empowered the very elements that later came to hunt him. In a sense, he created a Frankenstein monster that brought down the dynasty of Assad, the father and the son, and put an end to the dominance of the Alawite in the Syrian politics. That's all I have to say. Thank you all for listening to me. I give the floor back to Ibrahim.
Thank you for that. That was perfectly timed. I was just about to send a message. Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was fascinating. Our next speaker has Hashim Hayder joined us.
Unfortunately, he is not reachable right now. I called many times, but he didn't reply. I don't know why. Just we communicate last evening.
Okay.
Uh,
And then I'm just checking, and then Haian Dukhan is
That's a pre-recorded video. Shema will now incorporate with the flow and we'll
wonderful.
listen to. Yeah, Shema.
And that will save me from having to keep track of time.
Yeah. Shema.
I'm here. Just 1 second. I'm going to share the video. Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Then when I start, could you please just thumbs up if you hear the voice too?
Hello, my name is Haian Dukhan. I'm a lecturer in politics and international relations at Teeside University. Today, I will be talking about my latest publication, which is a paper that was published in Digest of Middle East Studies, Memory, Fear, and Manipulated Sectarianism, exploring Christian views and intercommunal dynamics in Al-Hasaka Governorate in northeastern Syria amidst the Syrian uprising. And this is part of a larger research project on studying the sectarian phenomenon in the Syrian conflict. The findings of the research should be published soon in an edited volume titled Sectarianism and the Syrian Civil War. Right. So let me begin by providing some context and outlining the focus of this research. The Syrian uprising and the subsequent civil war have been analyzed quite extensively, but much of this analysis has revolved around sectarian dynamics between the Sunnis and the Alawite groups. While this perspective is important, it often oversimplifies the situation and overlooks the roles of other religious and ethnic groups within Syria's diverse society. And this study shifts the focus to a less explored aspect, which is the experiences of the Christian community in the Al-Hasaka Governorate. Specifically, it examines two critical questions. First, what factors have shaped the positions of the Christians in Al-Hasaka during the Syrian uprising? Secondly, what impact have these positions had on intercommunal dynamics in the region? And the research argues that the Christian community's collective memory of historical fear, coupled with the Syrian regime's deliberate manipulation of these fears, has contributed to two distinct forms of sectarianism. The first is sectarianism from below, where grassroots identities emerge in response to marginalization and insecurity. The second is sectarianism from above, which is driven by political elites and institutions that exploit these identities for strategic purposes. Understanding these dynamics is essential for broadening our perspective on sectarianism beyond the Sunni Shiite, the Sunni Alawite binary, which has been used in Syria quite a lot by shedding the light on the complexities of intercommunal relationships in conflict zones like Syria. Now, I will briefly talk about kind of my frame of analysis here. I will explain the analytical framework used in this study, which combines two complementary perspectives to explore sectarian dynamics. The first perspective is historical sociology, which focuses on societal dynamics and historical legacies. And this approach helps us understand sectarianism from below, where grassroots identities emerge in response to long-standing discrimination, marginalization, and collective fear. It highlights how historical events like the displacement and the persecution that the Christians have been exposed to shape community perceptions and responses. The second perspective is instrumentalism, which emphasizes the role of political elites and their strategic manipulation of sectarian identities. And this approach explains sectarianism from above, where elites exploit existing fears and historical trauma to achieve political objectives, such as consolidating power or marginalizing opposition groups. By combining these perspectives, the analysis provides deep understanding of sectarianism. It bridges the bottom-up analysis or processes driven by societal dynamics and the top-down strategies employed by powerful actors, which is in case the Syrian regime. Together, these lenses allow us to better understand the interplay between historical legacies and elite manipulation in shaping sectarian identities and intercommunal relations. I'll move now to look at the methodology. I mean, the methodology for this research involved a combination of qualitative approach to enable us to examine the dynamics of sectarianism in Al-Hasaka. First, I conducted extensive literature review, and this helped me establish theoretical framework by examining prior studies that have been conducted on the issue of sectarianism, historical sociology, and instrumentalism. The review also provided foundation for understanding the broader context of the Syrian uprising and the experiences of religious minorities, broadly speaking. Secondly, the study employed discourse analysis to investigate how narratives around sectarianism are constructed and perpetuated. And this involved analyzing political speeches of political leaders in Syria, religious sermons of Christian clerics in Al-Hasaka, social media posts, and personal testimonies as well. So by applying this method, the study uncovered how the discourse reflects and shapes perceptions within the Christian community. Third, social media analysis was a critical component as well, given the significant role of these platforms, particularly Facebook and the Twitter, currently called X, during the Syrian uprising. Posts by influential writers from the region and activists in Al-Hasaka were analyzed to capture the contemporary perspectives and concerns. Lastly, online interviews were conducted with individuals who had either witnessed the early stages of the uprising or later displaced at a later stage of the conflict. And these interviews provided first-hand accounts of how the Christians in Al-Hasaka perceive the uprising, the opposition forces, and intercommunal dynamics. So this is just kind of the methodology, briefly speaking here. Now I just want to look at the complexity actually of the Christian identity, because when we talk about the Christians in Al-Hasaka, we're talking about a hybrid of identity that is kind of ethnic, religious, and national at the same time. I mean, the Christian identity in Al-Hasaka is deeply rooted in the region's history, yet it has undergone significant transformations over time. Historically, the Christians were the largest kind of number of people in Syria after the Muslims, particularly in Hasaka, And Al-Hasaka served as a vital home for Assyrians, Syriac, and Armenians. So we're talking about three ethnic groups here. And these communities trace their origins to early Christianity, with Assyrians being among the first to embrace their faith in this faith in the first century AD. However, their history has been marked by challenges, including the Arab conquest, the Mongol invasions, and the Assyrian genocide during the early 20th century. These events led to mass displacement within many of the Christian communities that have been seeking refuge in Al-Hasaka from neighboring regions in Turkey and Iraq. Over time, the demographic composition as well of Al-Hasaka shifted. While Christians once constituted the majority, waves of migration by Kurdish and Arab communities, coupled with lower birth rates among the Christians as well, have transformed them into a minority. Economically as well, Christians in the region initially flourished, particularly during the agricultural revolution that took place in the 1950s and the 1960s, and the discovery of oil in the mid-20th century. However, this prosperity was undermined by the Ba'athist land reform, which stripped many of the landowners of their land in the 1960s, and many of them were Christians as well. So these reforms confiscated the land from these large landowners in the area. And the lack of infrastructure and development further pushed many of these Christians to immigrate and live in Al-Hasaka. One unique aspect of Christianity in Al-Hasaka is its hybrid nature, which I talked about it just a while ago. While ethnic distinctions such as Assyrian, Syriac, and Armenian exist, they are often overshadowed by shared Christian religious identity. And this religious identity becomes especially predominant during times of crisis, providing collective sense of security and solidarity. In essence, the Christian identity in Al-Hasaka is shaped by complex interplay of historical, economic, and demographic factors, making it a critical lens through which we can analyze the region's dynamics. Now, I move to analyze the first aspect of this paper, which I describe sectarianism from below, which refers to the grassroots emergence of sectarian identities, shaped by a community's experiences of discrimination, marginalization, and existential threats. For Christians in Al-Hasaka, these identities are deeply rooted in the historical events, the Arab conquest of the 7th century and the Assyrian genocide during the early 20th century left profound scars, and these events are etched into the collective memory of the community as instances of displacement, massacres, and persecution are deeply entrenched in their memories. In recent years, the historical fear has been reignited by events such as the rise of Islamic extremism. For example, in 2015, ISIS seized control of 34 Christian villages, displacing residents and creating lasting distrust towards their Arab Muslim neighbors. Even after the liberation of these villages, the perception of betrayal persisted, further isolating the Christian community. Psychocultural factors also play a significant role in the Christians in Al-Hasaka, because they view themselves as the region's indigenous population, yet they see their community as fragile and under threat. Shared historical narratives of persecution, survival, reinforce their identity and amplify their mistrust of other groups. In response, the community has increasingly prioritized self-preservation, and this had led to actions like the formation of the Sotoro militia, for example, which announced its allegiance to the Syrian regime. For many Christians, aligning with the regime is seen as a way to ensure their safety, because the regime was considered as a protector of their cultural and religious rights. In summary, sectarianism from below for Christians in Al-Hasaka is a complex phenomenon rooted in history, trauma, and the ongoing realities of conflict. Now, I move to look at what I described sectarianism from above, which refers here to the top-down manipulation of sectarian identities by political elites, particularly here the Syrian regime, to achieve their strategic objectives. And in the case of Al-Hasaka, the Syrian regime has played a central role in exploiting these dynamics. One of the regime's primary tactics has been the exploitation of historical trauma within the Christian community. For example, by invoking memories of past persecution, such as the Syrian genocide, and more recent violence by Islamist groups, the regime has worked to reinforce loyalty among the Christians. And this messaging aligns with narratives that positions the regime as the protector of Syria's religious minorities, which Syrian media has been working on. The regime has also collaborated closely with the Christian religious leaders to amplify its narratives. Clergy have used sermons to denounce the opposition forces and highlighted the regime's role as the guardian of the Christian communities. Media outlets, Syrian regime media outlets, support these messages by framing the opposition as barbaric and by framing the regime as the only protector of the minorities and the Christians of Syria, portraying the opposition as extremist threats. And to strengthen its position, the regime has employed several key strategies. One notable approach has been mobilizing Christian youths into regime-affiliated militias like the Sotoro that I talked about earlier, with the potential of what they claim, protecting their areas from Turkish encroachment and bringing historical memories of the Assyrian genocide. The regime emphasized the idea as well that Christians, according to Bashar al-Assad himself, who spoke about this in the media, are the original inhabitants of Syria, linking their heritage to the preservation of Syria's national identity. So the combined effect of these tactics has been significant. Many Christians in Al-Hasaka started to see the regime as the primary source of their security, leading to a deepened reliance on its protection. At the same time, these efforts have reinforced sectarian divides, further isolating the Christian community from other groups and fostering mistrust and intercommunal relations. So, in summary, sectarianism from above highlights the regime's calculated use of fear, historical narratives, and strategic alliances to solidify its position and influence within the Christian community. So, the findings briefly, this research highlights the complex interplay of grassroots dynamics and elite strategies in shaping sectarianism among Christians in Al-Hasaka. One of the primary drivers of sectarianism has been the collective fear rooted in historical trauma. Events such as the Assyrian genocide and recent violence by groups like ISIS have created a deep sense of vulnerability. And this fear is further compounded by deep threats from Islamist groups and demographic shifts as well that I talked earlier about in the region, including the influx of Kurdish and Arab populations. As a result, many Christians in Al-Hasaka have aligned themselves with the Syrian regime, which they viewed as a protector of minority rights against existential threats. This alignment is not merely ideological, but is strategic, as Christians seek to ensure their security and preserve their cultural and religious rights under the regime's influence. Significant aspect as well of these dynamics is the regime's manipulation of narrative. By framing the opposition groups as extremist and barbaric and violent, the regime positions itself as the only viable safeguard for Christians. At the same time, it promoted the idea that Christians are an integral part of Syria's identity, and heritage, reinforcing their loyalty. These dynamics have had profound implications for intercommunal relations. The combination of grassroots fears and elite-driven narratives has heightened the mistrust between the Christians and the Kurds and the Arabs who live in Al-Hasaka, further entrenching sectarian divides. Overall, this research provides insights into the dual processes of sectarianism from below and sectarianism from above. It underscores the challenges of reconciliation in multi-sectarian societies and the need for inclusive narrative to bridge these divides. Thank you.
Okay, that was fascinating. So, as we proceed on the schedule, Dr. Shilan couldn't make it. So, next, Rojin Mukriyan, the floor is yours. So, I will send you a message just to keep your eye out on the message. Of course, we're going to be ahead of schedule, but about 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and 1 minute as your presentation comes to an end, I'll ask you to wrap up.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon from me. Before starting my discussion and my talk today, I would like to extend my gratitude to the European Center for Populism Study for organizing this panel. And now I'm sharing my slides. Yeah, I hope everybody can see it. So my discussion today will be a touch different from other contributions that so far we heard them, because I have a political theory background and I like to play with theory. So my paper will be a touch boring as it tries to combine some theories available in the literature of populism and apply that to the Kurdish politics. So today I'm going to present a paper. It is entitled Populism in Kurdish Politics, a comparative study of Rojava, West Kurdistan or Northeast Syria, and Bashur or South Kurdistan or North Iraq. So in this paper, I conduct a critical analysis of populism in a democratic autonomous administration of North and East Syria by looking at the Democratic Union Party's performance and act there. And then I'm going to examine populism in the Kurdistan regional government that is dominated by Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, PUK, or Kurdistan Democratic Party, KDP. So by applying Ernesto Laclau's notion of populism, which he defines populism as a strategy for hegemonic struggle, and combine that with Jan Warner Miller's populism as a permanent shadow that covers or challenges representative democracy, I will argue in this paper that PYD in the Democratic Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria exhibits left populist characteristics by forming a counter-hegemonic bloc centered around democracy as the main signifier. And here I think Dr. al-Marashi at the beginning of this panel mentioned Abdullah Öcalan, that can Abdullah Öcalan be a populist figure? And here my discussion will be useful because we know that PYD actually tried to, trying to practicize or materialize the notion of democratic confederalism that is proposed by Abdullah Öcalan. Moving to Iraq, to Kurdistan region, Kurdistan region government, I will show in this paper that PUK and KDP lack left populism because they don't promote inclusivity or they don't even challenge the established system because they are themselves are the system. So it is dominated KRG by elite families, which they reflect neoliberal tendencies, and they don't offer any anti-establishment prospects. So at the end, I will argue that a left populism bloc, such as that of DANS, could effectively actually challenge the KRG's corrupt governance if it gains support within Iraqi Kurdistan. So to fulfill the objectives of the argument, this paper is divided into 3 sections. The first one, I'm going to delve into the discussion on the concept of populism, especially by providing a critical analysis of Lachlan and Miller's work. And in the second section, I examine populism in the KRG by analyzing the political structure and governance there. And I do this by focusing on political speeches during especially the 2024 parliamentary election campaign, especially the speeches by figures such as Bafel Talabani, the PUK leader, and Masroor Barzani, KRG prime minister. And at the third section, or the final section, I will examine the theoretical framework and governance structure in DANS, particularly by looking at the PYD. And by looking at PYD, I look at Abdullah Öcalan's post-1919 prison publication and the social contract of DANS. And I look also at some public statements by key figures such as Mazlum Abdi, Commander-in-Chief of Syrian Democratic Forces, or Ilham Ahmed, PYD member and co-chair of Syrian Democratic Council, and speeches by PYD co-chairs, including Saleh Muslim. So, starting our theoretical framework on populism, I use Ernesto Lachlan's book on populist reason. And in this book, Ernesto Lachlan defines populism not merely a regime, ideology, or political program. He describes it as a way of constructing the political landscape, a descriptive strategy that divides society into 2 camps, mobilizing the underdogs against those in power. So Ernesto Lachlan provides 3 preconditions for populism to emerge. The first one is internal antagonistic frontier, and he argued that in order to have populism, we need to form or divide the society in 2 blocks. One is the people, and the other one are those who actually hold the power. And the second condition is that for all the democratic demands to come together and to form a popular demand. And popular demand emerges as a plurality of demands through their equivalential articulation. And through this articulation, through this coming together, this plurality of demands, we create a broader social subjectivity, and out of this social subjectivity, we create the people by utilizing what he calls an empty signifier. He doesn't mention what can be this empty signifier, because it can be different depending on the different context. Which I'm going at the end said how PYD used democracy actually as an empty signifier to mobilize the public. So the third precondition for populism to emerge, and here I should say for a left populism, according to Ernesto, even if we form a chain of equivalence, still that cannot do anything. For this chain of equivalence to become meaningful, it needs to be crystallized it needs to go beyond just a mere expression or showing just solidarity. It needs to be materialized. But on the other hand, we have Jan Warner Miller, which he actually says that framing populism as the remedy for elite-driven democracy is an illusion, and it casts a permanent shadow of populism over democratic practices. So he, in this book, What is Populism?, provide us with 7 theses of populism, which more fitted with right-wing populism. And you guys might now ask why I'm applying or using Muller or Ernesto Laclau here, why not other works? The reason for this, I think, comes first from the complex and often very ambiguous nature of populism. We know that we don't have a single notion of populism, so I thought it would be useful and constructive to provide 2 conflictual views on populism. And the second reason comes from the complex nature of Kurdish politics. That's the justification behind the using of these 2 authors' work. But the 7 theses of Muller refers, the first one, to the idea that populism always claim that they are the true or authentic representatives of the people, but actually they're not. They're just like permanent shadow over representative democracy. The second one is that a populist figure try to show itself as anti-elitism, but this anti-elitism is rooted on their anti-pluralistic view towards society. The third one is that the third thesis of populism, according to Miller, is that symbolic representation. And by that, he refers to the idea of symbolic portrayal of real people, which resist to factual challenges. The fourth thesis is that political participation, and by that he says that populism doesn't enhance participation because they claim that they are anti-corruption, anti-elitism, anti-establishment, but actually they don't want to enhance participation or public engagement. And what they do is seeking validation for predetermined decisions. And the fifth thesis is that they try to, the populists often try to govern through clientelism and corruption, which justified with their framework. And for this reason, the sixth thesis is that the real actually danger or threat to democracy. This seventh and the last one is that it is false, according to Muller, to think that populism provides a corrective tool for liberal democracy. So going and applying these 2 different views on populism in Kurdish politics, we first look at populism in KRG. And to give you a brief historical and political view on how KRG formed, we know that KRG formed in 1991 through an announcement of no-fly zone by UK, US, and France, and that provided KDP and PUK with enough opportunity to consolidate their power and to establish independent governmental institutions in 1992. They tried to share power based on the model of 50-50 split among themselves, among the 2 parties, but this failed. We had a civil war in 1994 to 1998, which led to the division of KRI, or Kurdistan region of Iraq, into 2 different zones. Yellow zone is the KDP control, and the green zone is PUK control. And we still have this division there, which I will talk about this at the end again. So in 2005, after the US invasion of Iraq, KRI formally recognized within a federal Iraqi state, and in 2006, the PUK and KDP signed a strategic agreement which prevented them to enter into another civil war. And what they did in this agreement, they basically again divided the power equally between themselves, but also they preserved a high-ranking positions or seats both within the KRG and within the federal Iraqi state. For example, Jalal Talabani became the president of Iraq, and Masoud Barzani, the leader of the KDP at that time, became the president of KRI. And this had severe consequences for the future, political future of KRI and their governance structure. It entrenched two-party system and hindered new political actors, which we showed this when the Goran movement or change movement emerged in 2009, that how this system, this like established entrenched two-party system, prevented the Goran movement from rising or becoming popular within both KRI and within the government itself. And power remained concentrated, and that contributed to KRG's instability and inefficiency. It also weakened the parliamentary power as it weakened the check and balance system there. So, but the problem is not, I argue, the problem is not the strategic agreement signed in 2016 between the KDP and the PUK. The main problem is the nature of the KDP and PUK, their political nature. Their political party nature is not based on like a normal party system. It's first was a tribal oriented parties. Later, after the invasion of Iraq, it turned to family party. So by family party, KDP dominated by Barzani family, and PUK.
If you could sum up in a minute, please.
Oh my God. Okay. So anyway, I'm going to be faster. The KRG system is defined as sultanism by Kava Hassan, and by sultanism, he says that it has 4 pillars. This sultanism in KRG, it's based on cronism, clientelism, nepotism, and dynasticism. So we see that, and we saw the Goran movement emerge in 2009, and they tried to challenge the KDP-PUK government, but failed in 2013, especially by the rise and the emergence of the ISIS. And in post like 2017, we saw again some changes within KRG, especially in the leadership of the KDP and PUK, and new generation came and took the leadership power. Masoud Barzani resigned after the independence referendum in 2017, and Jalal Talabani died in October 2017. However, this change of leadership and this generational shift didn't decrease or reduce the tension between KDP and PUK, and this tension still exists. And that gave to the rise of a populist movement in Chantal Mouffe's words or terms, because if we use Chantal Mouffe's concept, which he defines post-political and post-democratic condition, we see this right now in KRG, which the opposition between left or right become obsolete, the political discourses become blurred, and the neoliberalism undermines equality and popular sovereignty by eliminating agonistic struggle. This is obvious in KRG, and they gave opportunity to somebody like Baful Talabani, especially during the campaign in parliamentary campaign in 2024, to show himself as a populist figure, to challenge the KDP governance in KRG, in the parliament. For example, he adopted attire or black t-shirt and jeans, and took a very relaxed tone by engaging with the audience and the people directly, and using the slogans, we will tear down this corrupted authority. And by this, he separated himself, part of the government, part of the elites, part of the already established party, separated itself from the power, from the government, and blamed KDP for all the failure of KRG. However, I argue that while Bafel Talabani tries to use populism rhetoric, he cannot be considered as a populist figure because he is part of the elite. He's not against the government, the establishment, and he's not challenging the structure of governing there. So, and my argument here will be that to effectively challenge this entrenched authority, it actually will be more beneficial to form a counter-hegemonic left populism coalition that is rooted in Chantal Mouffe and Ernesto Laclau words. I cannot present the whole, it seems like, paper. And at the end, I talk about populism in democratic autonomous administration of North and East Syria, and I try to show here how PYD used democracy, especially self-governance, especially the gender liberation, as a signifier to mobilize the people, especially youth, environmentalists, activists, leftists, anarchists, and form an umbrella or block, a counter-hegemony block against both the ultra-nationalists comes from the nation state system and also Islamist fundamentalists. Yeah, I cannot finish it, but thank you so much.
Thank you. And I do see questions. If you have questions as the presentations evolve, go ahead and put the questions in the chat function, and then we'll be able to address them. So I do see a question by Cengiz addressed it to Rojin. So we'll save them for the Q&A. We're fortunate that we were just joined by Hashim al-Rekabi. Thank you for making this dramatic entrance. As always, you built up your suspense. Hisham, do you have a PowerPoint, or will you just be presenting?
Thank you all. I'm sorry for joining you a bit late, but I have a problem with my connections. Unfortunately, I don't have slides because I'm joining from my phone, but I could briefly talk on my research. So shall I start, if you allow?
Yes, of course, please do.
How long I have?
You'll have 15 minutes. So I will, when you're down to about 5, 3, 4, 2, 1 minutes, I'll be sending you messages.
Okay, thank you. So actually, my research tried to challenge kind of the assumption that we should study Iraq post-2003 in isolation. And in my paper, I try to demonstrate that many of the dynamics of pre-2003 are ongoing after 2003, the regime change in Iraq. And I choose the theme of populism because Saddam, he was a dictator. His slogan was, he's a pan-Arab regime, but he's often used kind of religion as instrument to justify his actions. So when we apply kind of populism as discursive course or dialogue, it could be applied on Saddam. And I found many of the experiences of Latin America similar to the experience of Saddam regime, because he was authoritarian and he still utilized populist rhetoric to justify his action to his own constituencies. And I think one of the consequences of this authoritarian populism of Saddam regime, it created kind of the context because Saddam, by repressing all political mobilization forms, by controlling the media, by having this anti-imperial rhetoric, populist rhetoric, start imposing on people the mentality that things could be either white or black, which is the dichotomous view of things, either white, black, good or bad. And I think this created the context for the post-2003 populism. After 2003, we had number of political actors. These actors, they were all repressed during Saddam. So when they come back to Iraq, they don't have any route to their constituencies. So this is why they utilize identity as a way to communicate, to mobilize their own constituencies. And they all, as a parties, they all accepted democracy as mean to reach power. But because they failed to deliver to their constituencies, because they are fragmented, to the security, like there are many reasons, they could not deliver. So there is the representation, everyone is represented, but they don't deliver. The system is not functioning. This is why these same groups, while they are the system, start utilizing populist rhetoric. They start attacking the system. So it will be funny. You will find a member of parliament from a leading bloc attack the parliament. You find ministers attack the government. You find judges attack the judiciary, despite the fact they are part of the system. And this is why I believe from 2003 till 2014, we had the populist actors. And those actors, because they cannot deliver, voice the citizens or people feelings like the system is corrupt, the system is not working. But I think the change, the third wave, and this I call it identity populism. The third wave in Iraq, which is the post-2014, because after ISIS, Daesh, the terrorist organization, when controlled Iraq, the relevance of identities kind of diminished because, Iraqis united and fight Daesh and liberated. So citizens no longer accepted kind of this identity politics. And I believe this moment led to the rise of modern populism, which is defined by Papas as the illiberal democracy. You have actors who are democratic, but their practices are illiberal. So they compete in elections, they accept election results, they form a coalition government, but they are tolerating violence if necessary. They tolerating undermining state institutions if necessary to achieve their agenda. And this populist, modern populism, unfortunately, was rewarded in election. I demonstrate in election those who utilize populist rhetoric, they were rewarded in elections. And then, and this is kind of the theoretical part of my study, the second, it was kind of a field study. And in this field study, I tried to analyze kind of the impact populism have on democratic survival in Iraq. Because in my opinion, like Iraq survived as a system, survived many existential crises like Daesh, Al-Qaeda, all this. But populism is kind of enemy from within the system. So it cannot identify it, you cannot fight it. And its impact actually far more dangerous because with Daesh, with terrorism, it kind of unify people to face this crisis. So in my survey, I found actually people, when you ask them, for example, what democracy means to you, Is it like multi-parties? Is it free election? Is it free media? They say no. It's like services. When you ask them, okay, do you prefer a strong man, a democratic system? They will say we want a strong man. So my theory, like this modern populism that emerged in Iraq post 2014, is very dangerous on the survival of democratic system in Iraq, because first it have people give up on the idea of democracy, on the values of democracy. And the second, it start kind of a new generation of people who feel nostalgia to the strong man, to the dictator who could solve all problems without much discussion, without much lengthy negotiations. So this is in a brief kind of my work. I would be happy to answer any questions, any comments you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, without further ado, the floor is open up for questions. So I see that we have one question in the comments. Feel free, if you want to ask directly, to raise your hand or put them in the comments. So if I could direct the panelists' attention to Chingiz Akhtar, who's asking, thank you for the presentations. Any insight regarding the ongoing deals and/or agreements between Damascus and the DAANES?
Can I answer?
Yes, please, Rosie. Yes.
Yeah. So I couldn't get into this like slide, but when we speak especially about the theory that PYD is implementing, democratic confederalism coming from Abdullah Öcalan, there are many critics against them that it's not clear what they're doing. So especially coming from the left libertarian or anarchist like perspectives, that they're in the one hand saying that we are locally organized, trying to directly and through a direct democracy govern or give the power back to the people, but at the same time, it's not clear what they're doing. They're talking to previously to Assad regime, now they're talking to the people in the Damascus, Al-Julani, and blah. First, we should make this point clear that while some aspects of the theory of Abdullah Öcalan looks like that it is a radical rupture from the existing system, but if we look at closely to when he talks about the compromise, he says that democracy and the state are two contradictory phenomena, but a peace is possible when these two can actually find a way for compromise. So when they strike a balance, then we have a peace. And this is what now PYD or the people in Rojava, and we shouldn't just here say PYD because it's not just the PYD now there, it's other forces also, other Kurdish forces, other non-Kurdish forces that they trying together to form a unified bloc or counter-hegemonic bloc to engage with the people in Damascus. And for this, the strategy is to democratize or to change the state-centric political power from within. And what the result will be, we should wait and see how the negotiation will go, because when we're talking about the ongoing political events, it's hard to predict it, but from a theoretical perspective, I think that is the strategy, to not engage or pursue a radical rupture from the existing system, from the state itself, but to try to change them by working with them from within, like them. So, yeah.
Any other comments? Thank you, Jengiz, for that question. If not, Seljuk, you have your hand up.
Thank you very much for the fascinating presentations. I want to ask Professor Mahajar, if I understood your presentation correctly, you said in terms of ideology, there is not much difference between Al-Qaeda and Mr. Al-Shara, Ahmed Al-Shara. So is there any difference between the two? What is the difference?
Okay, thank you for the question. Actually, this is an interesting thing. Remember, when Al-Qaeda, took, was, carrying out massive suicide attacks after the American invasion of 2003, the Al-Qaeda headquarters, let's say, led by Ayman al-Zawahiri, actually issued a letter asking even the tactics of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, where Abu Muhammad al-Julani was, a commander in, that for the Al-Qaeda base in Afghanistan, their tactics were really, too harsh, too brutal. That is from the perspective of the people who created Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri. What happened was that Abu Muhammad al-Julani, when the Syrian civil war broke out, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, at that time it was called the Islamic State in Iraq. Later on, it was called the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. When he moved to Syria, he was a commander of Al-Qaeda. So he opened a branch, we can say, in Syria, where he disagreed with the commander of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, was that when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi announced that the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, and he said that the Syrian branch of Al-Qaeda should be, part of this new Islamic State, Abu Muhammad al-Julani made a televised statement saying, I play allegiance to Al-Qaeda, the main headquarters of Al-Qaeda, that is Ayman al-Zawahiri. But he stated very clearly that he's changing the name, but he's not changing the ideology in order for them, to be able, to work in Syria, to put it that way. So, and he was very clear that he's not really making this break based on ideological differences. He's making the break because of the reality of the Syrian situation. So he created what was later on Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham. But when he was saying that, he made clear that he is not making a break from Al-Qaeda ideology. He's simply making a tactical break. And that's why, until up to this very moment, if you go to the UN Security Council, you will find that Abu Muhammad al-Julani remains a UN designated terrorist. And there's a list of, all his, former names, his associations, all that being, still available and still intact in that sense. So I hope I answered your question.
Very good. Bulent?
Thank you, Ibrahim, and thank you very much for these insightful presentations and the ongoing discussions. My question is again for Rojin Mukriyan. In comparing Rojava and the CARC, you argue that the former exhibits left populism, while the latter aligns more with the neoliberal clientelism. My question is that how might Kurdish political culture across the borders shift if Rojava-style governance gains legitimacy or more legitimacy in Rojava and beyond? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just, So that's a very interesting question. And we already actually see some changes. And it comes from, again, that how basically, because what leads PYD before everything is that theory that they have it. So they have a blueprint, kind of, a theory that they try in one hand preserve the theory to not give it up all, but at the same time preserving the Rojavan territory or its existence in any source is also on their agenda. So, but now, how especially we had like a few moments, they're actually talking to their high-ranked people in Bashur, in KRG. Last night, Mazlum Kobani or Mazlum Abdi had a talk or sitting with Nechirvan Barzani a month ago with Masoud Barzani. We see some close relation. It seems from the picture they're happy, but that also, I think, comes from external pressure from the US, France especially, that they, Kurdish forces, need to unify, need to come with a solution. In KRG, for example, if I mentioned that we had few moments of civil war between PUK and KDP, but they reached a modus vivendi by dividing power between themselves. Is that going to happen in Rojava, in Bashur? I don't know, but there are a historical necessity for reaching some peace or peace agreement or modus vivendi between PYD and other Kurdish forces, especially Kurdish National Council that are supported by KDP or KRG. But what is going to happen to the border? If, for example, if we have Rojava established as a legally recognized entity, either in a federal Syria or non-federal Syria, to have just some sort of local autonomy that will going to diminish the border, the physical border that already exists, I think it has the potential. We see already that the potentiality of Rojava to turn to a recognized entity, how it transferred the relationship between the Rojava, PYD-led Rojava and KDP-led KRG before the borders were closed between them. But now they're sitting together and it is every month. So it seems that it's going in this direction that probably is going to have a very positive impact on the physical border between these two parts. But again, it is dependent in many different variables that it is like within each politics. And when it comes to Kurdish politics, it is more complicated than this. All this territorial division between four nation states, that means that we have four different states to deal with their politics at the same time. But again, that transnational nature of also Kurdish politics makes everything more complicated and contingent upon the all political events around Kurdistan and international politics. So it's a fluid situation right now, but I am kind of positive that we're going to have something there in Rojava, and that's going to improve the relation between Kurdish people, and is going to gradually bring or overcome Kurdish disunity somehow, because this is also interlinked to Kurdish people in Bakur, in Turkey. We see that how like what is going on between the Kurdish people and Erdogan impacts Rojava. And we know that Turkey is the very first like aid to KDP, KRG. So it's all interconnected. Any positive move in one side directly has impact in the other sides.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? But because I cannot find the emoji that's raising the hand. So if
No worries, Reda. Exactly. Just please.
Thank you. I have two questions. One for Rojin. I really liked the paper you presented. I mean, the way that you decoded the dense work of Ernesto Laclau is really, impressive. I was wondering if you published a paper on this very subject that you presented today, using Ernesto Laclau to decode the politics of populism in the Kurdistan in these two different areas. My second question is to Hashim Al-Rekabi. If I may ask, you spoke about different waves of populism. And before you joined, Ibrahim actually spoke of the people he spoke who embodied populist leaders is Muqtada al-Sadr in Iraq. So in your account of different waves of populism, How do you position Muqtada Sadr as a populist leader, or if you even position him as such? So, thank you.
Okay, I go first. Thank you for the question. It's not yet published. It's under actually construction, and getting the invitation for this panel actually gave me the enough motive to try to write this paper. It's like the first draft is ready, but it's not published yet, and I am hopeful that I will publish it soon. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So indeed, in my paper, is not only Sadr is a populist, because usually in media they only focus on a Sadr, which is indeed populist because first he often dissolve his own political party. He always attacked the establishment despite have ministers, deputy ministers, DGs and advisors. So he's a populist, but I feel in the media they only focus on Assad as the populist figure. But in my paper, I say it's more than him. It's all the parties during election utilize this populist rhetoric. And it's not only in the Shia landscape, but also in the Sunni landscape. I have a few examples. I agree with Rojin, also in the Kurdish parties like with Bafal, others. They are part of the system, but still they utilize the rhetoric to mobilize people on their side. I hope this answers your question. Okay, welcome.
Very good. Any other questions, Bulet?
Yeah, thank you, Ibrahim. Actually, this question is for you as moderator and of course an expert on Iraqi state institutions. You has written extensively on these Iraqi state institutions. So I wonder, how do you see the interplay of ethnic and sectarian populisms reshaping not only Iraq's internal political coherence, but also its regional geopolitical posture?
I think we're in
This question also can be answered also by Hashim.
So Hashim, please tell me if I'm correct, because you have the position on the ground. But so let's bring in the other populist movement that kind of never had a leader, but the coalition that began to coalesce in Tahrir Square. We forget that Baghdad has its own Tahrir, and the protests of 2019, the movement that more or less really ended not thanks to COVID. But I saw that as an inflection point in terms of it represented a generation that had very little memory of Saddam, but only had a memory of the experiment post 2003. So when we talk about kind of the intersection between ethno-sectarian identity as a mass mobilizer, I saw a counter-populist movement in opposition and rejection of that formula that had been used to govern Iraq for the last close to 2 decades. 2023 represented the 2 decades since the Iraq War and a whole generation that could have come of age, a youth bubble, a youth bulge, if you will. So now, like I said, the virus more or less dispersed the protests, but not their demands. And now I'm wondering, and to bring this kind of regional aspect together with the weakening of the axis of resistance. I mean, the axis of resistance was quite an interesting alliance. You had a Persian 12er Shia Iran, the 12er Shia militias in Iraq, an Alawite regime, Zaydi Shia Houthis in Yemen, Arab 12er Shias in Lebanon, and then a Palestinian Sunni Hamas, and we always forget Islamic Jihad. It was quite fascinating because this was at the moment where you had a really pan-sectarian alliance. But now my question is, with the collapse of that regional axis. Iraq now finds itself with a freedom to maneuver, and it's in this question now when I say an inflection point. Will ethno-sectarianism be a mobilizer now that Iran, I think, is almost kind of withdrawing from its influence in Iraq, for the time being at least? Will there be now something to fill in the void? And now with that question, I think, Hashim, you could answer more precisely because you're on the ground in Iraq. Hashim, you're muted.
Yes, yes. Sorry, I thought I just realized. Thank you. This is really important questions, and I believe the change started 2014 because prior to 2014, all the rhetoric, like even the announcement of electoral alliances, usually took a very sectarian. For example, Maliki goes to Karbala, Najafi, like from Nineveh, goes like to a historical Sunni mosque, and Nuri to announce his running election. So it was like a very sectarian, and prior to 2014. After 2014, with Daesh, like all parties start kind of rebranding. So we start having a Sunni competition, a Shia competition, a Kurdish competition. So it's no longer relevant to compete only on identity base. Because, for example, in the Shia landscape, there are 5 parties. They are all Shia. But prior to 2014, all Shia run as one list, all the Sunni as one list, all the Kurd as one list, right? But after 2014, you have them compete against each other, and the differences among themselves become real. And this is why now, for example, Sadr withdrew from the government of 21, because he said, I will not form a government with Maliki, with Khazari, these guys that I believe they are corrupt and so on. So in my view, since 2014, the ethno-sectarian rhetoric diminished. But I agree that sectarian dynamics remained relevant. What I mean. So in rhetoric, they don't talk about sectarian identities or ethnic identities. But when it comes, for example, to the distribution of posts, to the appointment of ambassadors, to the appointment of army commanders, this, again, the ethno-sectarian dynamic do exist. And I think the regional developments now only reinforce this system, because all these groups now, they are a bit worried of the regional developments. And for them, this ethno-sectarian quotation system, it grants them a representation. At least I have ministers, I have MPs, I have my own governor, and this is for them is an assurance for representation. And also they fear like what happens in Syria could be replicated in Iraq, or especially there are, with social media, there are people who try to say the scenario of Syria. I don't think so. I believe it will never happen, but this creates fears among people like such scenario. And this is why I believe the ethno-sectarian system will be only reinforced in light of the in light of the regional developments. And I only have, this is a bit of political discussion in Iraq also. Is it Iraq part of the axis of resistance? In Iraq, there are 300 parties. And those who have armed groups around 60. Only five of them, they are the ones who are part of the axis of resistance, only 5 of them. So it's not fair, in my view, to say Iraq is part of the axis of resistance. And even after the October 7 events and the clashes with the attacks on the US interests in Iraq, the government of Iraq start pursuing these groups. So if they launch attacks from Iraq, the security forces will investigate, will arrest them, and then for, I think, from February of 23 until now, there was no single attack by these groups. I mean, on their rhetoric, they speak whatever they wish, but there is no single like attack launched from February 2003, I believe so, or sorry, 24 until now. Just like mine. I hope this answers your question.
Hashim, which one are the 5 groups? I know Harakat Nujaba, Kitab Hezbollah. What are, I just know of those 2. Do you have 3 more?
Yeah, Allah al-Awfiya.
Okay.
And Kataib Sayyid al-Shuhada.
Okay.
And there's one more. Yeah.
Okay. It's by
Jund al-Imam.
Okay. Okay, very interesting. Okay.
And they call them together, if you Google it, the special groups. They call them the special groups. They are these 5. Yeah.
Very
but indeed, Kataib and Nujaba, they are the 2 who really dominate.
Yeah. Very
so
good.
Important one.
Excellent. Very good. Are there any further questions, comments? Rojin, I see your hand up.
Yeah, that's easier. I have a question again for Hashim, for you. And the number that you mentioned is very fascinating. And of course, quantity is so important. But I just like your argument really struck me. Oh, there are 300 political parties with 60, if I'm not wrong, 60 different militia groups. Only 5 of them are part of existence. So we can conclude that it's not true, or it's not credible to say that Iraq is not part of axis of resistance. But then the question is, the quality here is important. Are these 5 like number of like militia groups are the biggest one, the largest one? Are all these 60 militia groups are all have or share even power in terms of like the number of militia they have, forces they have, the power in political structure they have? They are also matter, I guess. So I will really appreciate, because I don't know anything about these like militia groups, like especially 60 of them. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for your question. I do believe this issue is a politicized, so it's sometimes difficult to argue academically, but I'll try to explain to you. For example, Badr organization is a fully integrated party. The militia started in 1980s. So during the war, Iraq-Iran war, they were established. So it's like not after 2003, not after 2014. So it's a very old militia. They have around 60,000 member, and they, I believe, 20 to 30 brigades on the ground. They control ministries, they control, and these are not part of these 5 groups. So they, in terms of equality role, these 5 groups, like Kataib, Nujaba, first, they don't control any ministry. Only Kataib have 5 MPs in parliament, and they are almost marginalized. They don't control the agenda. In terms of like provincial elections, they don't control any seat. You know, like it's Maliki, Badr, these parties who control. And even inside the PMF, Al-Hajj al-Shabi, these 5 groups, they only control like a very minority brigades. And you could read on it. Like, I mean, the Washington Institute have a very detailed profile of these people. For example, with Kataib, with Nujaba, they all have 2-3 brigades, not like with Badr. But indeed, they are good in utilizing media, and also the media focusing on their activities. You know, in Iraq, but I believe everywhere, media look for attention, and this is why they focus on these groups. But if you look to both the quantity and the quality of their roles, you see they are not that influenced. And I will give you just a recent example. You know, their rhetoric towards Syria, given you study Syria. Like the government line, we will not involve, we will respect the Syrian people, we would welcome the Syrian representatives since they are representing the Syria, right? This is the government line. But these 5 groups, they speak whatever they wish. They say, no, if he come, we'll kill him. But then later, Sudan met with Ashar. And many parties justify this. Syria is a neighbor, we need to work with them. So, I mean, just this example shows like these 5 groups, they even don't control, don't influence even the foreign policy of Iraq, not the domestic politics of Iraq. So I could give you a long list of examples that these groups, it's not fair to have Iraq as all part of the axis of resistance, while it's only 5 groups, and these groups, they don't have the influence on provincial election, on provincial politics, they don't have the influence on national politics, and they don't have the influence on foreign policy.
Bülent, your hand is up.
Yes, actually, I have a question for Rojin. I wonder, as a former journalist and as journalists, as always journalist, I wonder about how the recent negotiations started by ultra-nationalist MHP leader Devlet Bahçeli, a negotiation with the Abdullah Öcalan and the PKK, how it is pursued by the Kurdistani groups like from Rojava, Rojhalat, or Bakur, Bashur. What is your opinion? Are you optimistic about that, or is there any concerns about that? Do you think that it is a frankly way of negotiating with parties over very, very deep-rooted problems, you know? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is a very good question and very difficult also to answer. As I said, Kurdish politics has a transnational nature itself, and PKK itself is a transnational movement. So any decision by PKK, we know that the PKK has a sister party, even in Rojava, in Western Iran, called the Free Life, the Persia Kurdistan Free Life Party. And we know that PYD sharing the same ideology with the PKK as a democratic confederalism. So, and also the important factor or empirical factor here is that Bakur constitutes one of the biggest part of Kurdistan. 20% of the Turkish population is Kurds, and in terms of population of whole Kurdistan, if we imagine a Kurdistan without borders, they constitute 50% of the population of the Kurdistan, and by courts, the Turkish state considered as one of the biggest enemy that prevents Kurdish unity before everything, or emergence of any Kurdish political entity, either in terms of state or non-state. We know that Öcalan and the PKK, like affiliated group, they don't really advocate any state for Kurdish people. Theoretically, they are anti-state, and that comes from the discussion of Öcalan, and that's really part of their strategy. That's not just a tactic to achieve sort of autonomy. That's their real strategy. But saying all this, considering all this, we know that so far had a positive impact on the relation. We know that after Öcalan announced that the so-called call for peace and democratic society, and the PKK announced a ceasefire, we realized a ceasefire also, a temporary ceasefire announced between Rojava or the SDF forces and Turkish group SNA, Syrian National Army there. So that has come at least partially from this negotiation. But one important question here among the Kurdish people is that Rojava has many cards to play now. In general, the Kurdish people, because now in Middle East, we are in a situation or a political condition that many things is about to change in terms of the balance of power. Syria gone, the regime of Syria gone, Syria is weak, Iran, the Iranian state is weak, Turkish state power diminishing, especially by considering all these energy or trade routes that establishing, especially by the EU, are going around Turkey and trying to ignore Turkey. So also Turkey faces like internal crisis in terms of economic, in terms of politics. We know that Erdogan's election, presidential term is going to finish soon. So all this, they brought the Kurdish people, that the Kurdish people have many cards to play now. Why Erdogan calls for not a ceasefire, for the dissolution of the PKK. But we know that from a theoretical perspective, that the PKK emerged within a specific political context that requires the PKK to turn to an armed insurgent group, but that's gone. We, as Öcalan says, now in another period, another politics, and the PKK did its own job. So now a peaceful process has the potential to solve the Kurdish people. It has a direct influence on the fate, the political fate of Rojava, if this peace process or the so-called peace process to initiate, hasn't initiated yet. It's going to have a direct influence in the relationship between Rojava and Bashur, because this relationship depends on the decision of Erdogan. And it's going to have a direct influence on the political future of the Rojavati people, because we know that Iran and Turkey, as the two dominant states of Kurdistan, they are in terms of geopolitical terms, they are rival. They have a more convergent interest than divergent interest than convergent. But when it comes to the Kurdish politics and issue, they have something to share. But if Turkey solves this question, it strengthens Turkey as a state in the region, and that diminishes the Iranian state power. And we know that whenever the dominant state is weak of Kurdistan, that gives an opportunity to the Kurdish people. That's from one side. From the other side, if the PKK decides to really dissolve itself, we know that Peshawar still has arms, and some members of the PKK can go inside the Peshawar, and that also empower the bloc of Rojava. So it's going to, I see it positively myself, but saying all of this, it all depends on how Erdogan really tries to engage with this peace process. So far, Erdogan is under the curtain, is in the shadow, and it's a Bahçeli more initiative than Erdogan. But the reason for this, I think, is all comes from the history of the peace process between the PKK and Erdogan and HDP, that is now DEM Party. At that time, by peace process, Erdogan lost the vote of ultra-Turkish nationalism and doesn't want to try that, and tries to use actually Bahçeli because needs the Kurdish people now vote. And this, it needs the peace for its both political ambitions inside the Turkey and in the region. So I see it positively, and again, we have to wait and see how it goes in reality.
All right. Well, thank you. So we'll begin winding up. I'll just give an overall assessment. If I could just project on behalf of Dr. Shilan, I really think, and I'm just trying to plant the idea out there, that perhaps there might be a future panel on, let's say, state feminisms and populism. And the only reason I suggest this is we've had the collapse of the last Ba'athist regime in the Middle East, and both Iraq and Syria were famous for these mass mobilization armies that included women as kind of a way of, having women become the billboards of the state. We go from, the Ba'athist mass mobilization of women to now what's going on in Iraq, very divisive family status laws, lowering the age of marriage. Who is this meant to appeal to? The states, when they kind of legislate lowering the age of marriage in Iraq, for example. This is done to appeal to a certain segment of Iraq society. So I think that's really, I mean, I would really want to suggest and recommend having kind of a regional discussion now on gender and populism. But so let me bring everything together. I begin with waking up this morning under a populist regime in the US. And Rojin, when I saw Bafil's outfit, I reminded me of another person's outfit, and that's Nayib Bukele of Ecuador, sorry, of El Salvador, who came to the US in a black turtleneck, very much like Steve Jobs used to wear during his presentations for Apple. Of course, Bukele is quite interesting. Here is somebody of Palestinian heritage, now the president of El Salvador, but really part of, basically inaugurating a prison that is part of America's Gulag archipelago. I mean, you have from Abu Ghraib to Guantanamo to this now SECOT, this new prison in El Salvador. And Bukele sells it for populist appeal. He's basically saying, I'm the only one who could protect you, the masses of El Salvador, by locking people up. Trump loves that message and says, basically, can I send you the unwanted people in my territory and outsource my prisons to El Salvador? So sorry, I'm getting off subject, but you talked about sultanism. And I mean, the intersection between sultanism and populism, I think is fascinating, Rojin. And so this brings me to the other presentations. If we talk about sultanism, I think we have to, I saw a common thread, and that's the role of history, the role history plays in populism. Basically, this is my belief about the way history intersects with populism. It's the following. The past gives a populist legitimacy in the present and suggests inevitability in the future. So let's look at a couple of interesting examples. We mentioned Zahran al-Lush. We saw Bashar al-Assad. I want to go back to his father, Hafiz al-Assad, and Saddam. Here, let's just use an example of how they refer to past sultans in sultanism. In other words, let's take sultanism as a point and say, remember how both contest, I'm not talking about Zahran al-Lush said we're going to recreate the Umayyad Empire, but reminded me both Saddam and Hafiz claimed to be a new Salah ad-Din. And Salah ad-Din is a great populist figure in the imaginary because in terms of giving yourself legitimacy in the present, you're saying, I mean, Saddam was born in an area that the historic Salah ad-Din came from. He renamed the territory Salah ad-Din. Yet the burial place of Salah ad-Din is in Damascus. So you can see how both would claim the historical figure. But if Salah ad-Din in the past liberated Jerusalem, so too, then what were Saddam and Hafiz both claiming? That we are on the road to liberate Jerusalem. And, I find that as, part of the populist appeals that overcame, this is beyond just using the Ba'ath Party as a mass mobilization institution. You're invoking history to forge a connection with the masses, not only within your state, but on the regional level, on the pan-Arab level, if not on the pan-Islamist level. But anyway, so I saw these references to history when we refer to the resurrection of a Umayyad Empire. But then, if I could speak on behalf of Haian's lecture about the Assyrian genocide, and it could work in reverse, whether it's the Assyrian genocide or when Serbs invoke the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. So, on one level, history can give you a triumphant trope, if you will, but also the trope of past trauma. In other words, what are the Syrians saying? We were genocided in the past. And that gives your claims legitimacy in the present. And tragically, it suggests inevitability in the future. We'll be genocided again. This is the claim of, let's say, the Assyrians and the Syriac Christians in Hasaka. And we're forgetting to mention that with all of these communities, there's diasporas as well. And of course, here in San Diego, there's a very large Syriac and Assyrian Christian community. And when I used to be on the lecture circuit talking about Syria, this is something they would mention. So, how do the Christians of, let's say, the Al Jazeera region, Hasaka, and the Nineveh Plains create a link to their diaspora? It's through that shared trauma. And they're scared, their fears that that trauma would be repeated. But this kind of brings, an end to, the role of identity in populism. And I just wanted to thank our wonderful presenters. And Stella Shade, you have the final word.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ibrahim, for your great moderation and assessments. And yeah, thank you very much to our panelists for these insightful presentations. Thank you to all attendees as well for your insightful questions and remarks. And with this session, we conclude the Mapping Global Populism panel series. We thank you for joining us for this discussion, and we humbly encourage you to follow ECPS via our website and social media channels so you don't miss upcoming events and new series under various themes. Stay engaged, stay informed, and we look forward to welcoming you to future conversations. I wish you a great rest of the day.